progress.
All right.
Okay.
So we got the amazing Kim here, who's coming from Greenville, South Carolina, Kim Carter, and she runs a program in the city, but it's one of those cities that has a sort of forest in the middle of it, but she's serving an urban population. And one of the things that she does, which is rather extraordinary, is she her place is largely, or even totally, more or less staffed by people on the spectrum.
Yes.
And so one of the reasons I wanted Kim to come, because Kim actually hasn't gone through the Horseboy stuff yet, she will, is
We're working through online.
there's a lot that the conversation we're all having now is employment, what's next? And Joelle's tackling this, Joy is tackling this, and so forth. But I wanted Kim to come and talk to us about how she's organised this and how she makes it work. So, Kim.
And hello. It's wonderful to be able to share space with you all over these past few days. I love your sense of tribe and bringing people together. And when I started, I have Bramblewood Stables. It's in South Carolina. And we have lots of influx of growth right now. So where we used to have a lot of land and we weren't really an urban center, in the 15 to 17 years that I've been in this facility, it's just blown up around us. So we are super blessed to be able to lease property from landowners that are committed to keeping it horse use. And we have this ability to have 90 protected acres, and we use a very small portion of it. There's about 10 to 15 acres that we're using for the actual facility itself, and then we're just surrounded by woods. So I started out in traditional hunter-jumper world, and back in, when I was in my 20s, so about 25 years ago, I had all of my dream jobs. I was working full-time as a journalist, I was managing a gallery, I was selling art, and horses had always been that thing that I went to when I was a kid to save me. I would just sign myself up for lessons and say, hey, somebody give me a ride. I'd work off lessons. But just where I'm at, where we're situated is right beside a showing center. Everything was competition based. Everything was, you didn't really have a choice. It was gonna be hunter-jumper, or I'd sneak off and work with some cowboy trainers because they're the ones who fixed our horses when we broke them on that side of the industry. So when I was in my 20s, I found myself basically housebound with anxiety. I was working as a food writer. I was paying people to go to restaurants to come back and report to me. And everything just kind of caught up with me at once. So I took a year off to work on writing a book, and took a job cleaning stalls at a farm, because I knew that horses made me feel better. I just didn't know what, like why did they make me feel better? And at that time, the only thing that I could really do was go back into the hunter-jumper industry, take kids to shows. Well, I bought a horse, and I'm like, how am I gonna pay for this horse? So I started teaching and started, doing the typical show route. And pretty soon, I married a Turkish dressage trainer, and we kind of put our stuff together. Oh, yeah, as one does. I'm pretty sure it was just an arranged marriage within the industry. Like, they bring the guys over from Europe, and yeah. So he did have a green card at the time. So I was obsessed with finding someone who would show me how to do work in hand. And I was like, oh, he studied dressage all over Europe. That's why he came here. And he would just kind of blow through things. And I'm like, no. I want to know, like, how am I supposed to lunge? How am I supposed to do this hand stuff? And there was no one around that could really teach me. So he and I are still dear friends, but he split pretty suddenly after we had built up this amazing program. We had more students than we knew what to do with. We were in demand. It was right after, 2008, so economy had crashed. We still were going strong. So I found myself in the airport in Paris coming back from Turkey, and he was just like, oh, I don't want to be married anymore. And I'm like, okay, we've got a farm. What do I want to do? What do I want this farm to look like? And I was in Paris airport, and all this light was coming in, and I was just so miserable. But once again, when I got off the plane in South Carolina, horses were the thing that caught me and saved me and brought me back. But this time I realized that it needed to be with a clearer purpose. It needed to be with a clearer focus. So that was about 13 years ago. And I started, first we stopped competing. And then I started respecting the school horses that we had. So I love my senior citizens. I just adore them, and I love how they put up with us. So I was like, okay, maybe we'll take some of the jumps out of the ring. Maybe I'll stop teaching kids how to jump horses. Maybe I will actually teach them how to lunge. So little by little, we started taking little pieces of things and adding, subtracting within the program. And then the last time I took all the jumps out of the ring, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, I never put them back. And then I realized that I had all of these kids, all of these adults that come to me for lessons, and we're kind of like a pirate ship. We've got this old barn that's leaky. We're constantly having to keep it from sinking. And we started collecting the kids that no other barns wanted. And all of us on staff were people who didn't quite fit into the industry. Like, where do we fit? Like where's our home in this? So then we just started really focusing on creating our own home within that space. And then I kind of looked around and I realized that most of our staff was on the spectrum. Most of our instructors were. Both of my parents are. And it was just so amazing to be like, okay. And I remember like kind of giving these percentages, like people would say, do you do therapy? And I was like, no. But I would say that, 60% of our staff and students are on the spectrum. And then I got really opposed to the word therapy. And I just couldn't deal with it. I looked at all the different models, all the different certifications, everything that was out there, and nothing fit us. And I would put myself wholeheartedly into like, yeah, I'm gonna sign up for this. So in the midst of all of that, there's a Dutch woman who had moved into the area, and she was bringing, the concept of equine assisted learning and life coaching specifically. And that really fit the model for me. And this was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And I realized I had found my calling with that because I needed tools for the things that were happening that we didn't have tools for as traditional riding instructors in the ring. I needed to know what are we doing with our bodies? What are we doing with our minds? How can I help this person that the horse just brought up? All this stuff. So that became my focus, and I have my right-hand woman at the farm, Sarah Ferris, who's amazing. She was like, forget the human stuff. I don't care what the humans think. I just want to be over here with the horses. So she took a summer where she just stripped all the tack, and she just started going out into the field and spending hours and hours and hours with the horses and meditating out there. And I was over here working on building my coaching practice, which I, put my little shingle out for the mindset side of things the day that our city went into lockdown for COVID. And in South Carolina, we didn't lock down hard. But we had all these people that wanted to be outside that started happening during COVID. So I was building my coaching practice. Sarah was working on the training side of the horses. And we knew that it all came back to classical work on her side. And then one day, Sarah and I realized that from the human perspective and the horse perspective, we were doing the same work. And then everything just kind of exploded. And then I met this dude in the middle of the night for a Zoom that I signed up for that I didn't realize was in a different time zone. And within moments, we were just like, okay, there was this resonance, and I was like, he was like, why are you here? And I hadn't really asked myself that. And it was because I was like, we have, most of our staff is on the spectrum, and I need to know more. And I didn't even realize that all my answers for classical horsemanship were also going to come along with that package. So I thank you for that. But I always looked around as far as the hiring perspective. I think all of us are in the same boat of that we can't find people to do the work that we need to do within our farms. And so much has changed as far as employment just in the past 5 years. But I realized that the people who work, especially like those core people who keep the horses healthy and keep everything flowing, the people that we wouldn't have a farm without, no matter who's out there speaking in the ring, we no longer had adults who wanted to do this with their life, because it's just not it's not financially viable for most of the programs that are out there. And I have a family communications business that we sold a couple years ago. I have this wonderful mix of like this. I'm thankful for the lessons that I've learned from the corporate side, and also I'm going to start a farm and let's see where this goes. So the business side of things, you know, we're automatically people are, you know, not paid under their table. Like we're treating everyone as employees. And then I realized that, you know, I'm writing more recommendations for people who are going forward, looking for other jobs, whether it's in this industry or in other industries. And where we had always just looked at like, okay, this person's hired to clean stalls as a transitory, you know, just the temporary position. Suddenly, with these volunteers that had been with me for years and years and years, when I gave them a paid position, it became the position itself began to glow. And everything that we were doing within the farm kind of centered around this amazing central work that they were doing that the farm couldn't exist without. And what we struggle with the most now is, you know, we have a lot of kids that are, you know, coming out of high school. They may be taking classes online, so they have lots of free hours during the days. They go into, you know, college classes, or they may, you know, college may not be anything that they even want to work towards. Where we struggled the most as far as our central positions at the barn is having families see it as a viable track of employment instead of a hobby. So that's the language that I'm looking for to change as we go forward, finishing up this year and into the next year. And with the help of amazing mentors like Joelle, beginning our own nonprofit and opening ourselves up to grants. I am incredibly proud of how our program is able to pay for itself and the staff positions, and that it runs itself, and that we do have a tiny profit. And you know, it doesn't have to be much, it's just that tiny profit. We are, you know, we're keeping going each year, but we want to take advantage of more resources that are out there so that we can expand, particularly our program when it comes into employment. But I want to be able to find better language to help families understand that working within the agricultural sectors is not a subpar job. So that's where we're at right now. I think that brings us into the future. Yeah.
There's something which I'd like to, that sparked a thought, which is Ileana and I, as you know, created another website, which is the longridehome.com, which is the Helios program, which is all the in-hand work, but then also this thing called Face Your Bull, which is just sort of personal development with neuroscience, but kind of aimed at horse people, and Little Besa, which is the shamanistic side of all the stuff I've learned over the years, because I don't normally get to talk about that much, and people can find that helpful a bit. Okay, that's good. What we sort of have realised is that the need for people, obviously it starts with children, but it's as much there in adults. The need is, and it's a buzzword at the moment, but it's a good buzzword. The need is to rewild, to rewild oneself, to rewild the human brain. That most of the, it seems that most of the afflictions that we suffer from largely because we're almost never in the environment to which our organism is pre-programmed to be in. So sensorily, we're undergoing a kind of stress level that we're even unaware of, but is enormous, that takes its toll generationally, because you know we might be 5-10 generations in away from the land. And this was not always the case. And it's interesting working in Ireland, because I'd say when I started working with you and with Child Vision, David, I have seen, because Ireland's got a small population and it's still a big agricultural sector. However, I've seen that shift in the last 5 years. And I always assumed when you went to Ireland, it's horsemen, it's good horsemanship, it's good horses, it's da-da-da. And it's true, it still is, but it's eroded. And it's eroded in faster than I could have predicted. It's like, shit, this stuff that you take for granted, it's not. And I had the same experience in the Kalahari. We were in Namibia earlier this year, going to see healers with the Bushmen. And I realized how much I had taken for granted, that these people would still be there. And of course, I'm older now, I'm 56, and so the guys that I was working with 20 years ago have largely died. And the next generation coming up, it isn't really there yet. It may refine itself, and I've been even talking with Bushman friends of mine about this. I have a friend, Jumanda, in Botswana. I said, is it the same over in Botswana? He says, yeah, Ru, it's tricky because it's a really difficult thing. And the skill levels that are needed when you work with nature are higher than when you work with technology, much higher. And so if you don't start learning them young, it's relatively difficult to pick up as a late starter. It's hard to learn to ride a horse late in life. It's not impossible, but it's not like if you do it as a kid. It's hard to learn land management and pasture management and unless you've seen a certain number of seasons, you know, blah, blah. If you just drop in at 35, you don't have, having grown up on the family farm, say, well, what do you do when it doesn't rain? Or what do you do when it rains too much? Or what do you do, you know, and all this stuff that we took for granted. And I think that the conversation that I had with, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast, the latest one on the Equine Assisted World podcast was with Dr. Stephen Peters, you know, who's interesting because he's autistic and he's a neuroscientist and he's a physician. And we went into the whole axons and dendrites thing. And what he said, Ru, you know, your brain is a forest. You could think of it as a forest, you could think of it as a garden. That the axons and dendrites, which are like the trees with the branches, you can do it like a conifer plantation and just do them all in rigid rows. And as Jane would say, if you're moving the same way all the time, things close in rather than open up. Or if you're doing novel movement, which is what a hunter-gatherer would do, and to a large degree, if you're working with horses and that sort of thing, because you're moving in all sorts of different ways all the time, what happens is the axons and dendrites in your brain are more like a proper ecosystem. That's rewilding. So when you were talking, I feel more and more where I want to go, and I think rewilding is a word that people are sort of understanding on a gut level. I'd like to start introducing that language into what we do, and then so if you're talking about how do you convince people that that sector is viable, it's rewilding the professional sector.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, you end up wanting to top yourself. You just fucking burn out and you don't want to do your shit anymore. And it doesn't matter how much money you're making at it. And it doesn't matter, you know, none of it's enough.
Yeah.
So now, you know, we see these programs and the people that are coming in as the good volunteers and the good employees are people of retirement age who had it, left it, and now want to get back to it. There is, I think, a case for us to make to say the rewilding of the human brain. We've had our romance with the microchip, and that's dominated the conversation of the last 50 years, really. And now we're seeing what that's cost us, but we haven't lost it yet. Why can't we have both? We know that if you're a farmer like Henrik here, he's a farmer. He's got a farm and he raises crops and he sells them. He does it, and he's gone organic. He's the only guy in his neighborhood who's gone organic. But you know, he's the bloke on the tractor that you see out there plowing and but he's also doing all sorts of other things, and he's also using technology with this and stuff. So I guess I just want to introduce this idea of the rewilding of the professional sector for human health, for mental wellness. I think if we present it like that, we might have a chance to create, attract funding, basically.
It's interesting that has
Sure.
been our only way in. That's been our only way in.
Joy just popped up on mine
Okay.
and said it's possibly the next 15 minutes. is
Let's
the
do
best
it.
time.
Let's roll with Joy.
Perfect.
Yeah. Joy's Red Barn, Alabama, also has this great apprenticeship program which she's found through the state of Alabama. She's gonna tell us about this.